And all right, you guys. Well, it's about 6:30 Mountain Time, and we'll go ahead and get our call started on time. And thanks, really, everyone, for taking the time to join the call. My name's Azer Cole. I'm the State Campaigns Manager for American Promise, and I'm joined by Ben Gubitz, the Political Strategy Director for American Promise. Hey there, Ben.
Hello, Azer, and hello to all. Good evening.
Great. Well, I'm just going to quickly go through the agenda for the call. We'll give some quick background on the 28th Amendment, where it stands, what's already been done, what still needs to be done. Give some quick background information on American Promise as an organization, specifically what our strategic approach is, and then, most importantly, we'll talk about Colorado specifically and really how there's a major opportunity for a national breakthrough by working with legislators throughout the state. But first, since this is really a more of a small call, let's just go around and hear from people, where they're from and why they care, why you guys care about getting money out of politics. So you're all on mute right now, but when I call on you, I'll unmute you, and at any point we'll have Q&A, and you can press 1 on your keypad to raise your hand. But Ben, I know you're from Colorado. Let's start with you. Where in Colorado are you from, and why do you care about getting money out of politics?
Sure. Thanks, Azer. Yeah, like you said, I did. I grew up in Littleton, Colorado. I went to school in Durango, Colorado at Fort Lewis College, and have been living in D.C. and Boston since graduation about 10 years ago or so. Growing up in Littleton, I was in 8th grade when that tragedy in Columbine happened, just a couple short blocks away from my home, and, really saw the influence that the gun lobby and gun manufacturers had on policy. At a very young age, I was lobbying the Colorado State House for sensible gun reform, and didn't seem to get very far, and the big reason was money in politics. That was a long time ago, and we still haven't been able to really solve that problem, and things have gone in the other direction and gotten much worse. I now have a 2-year-old son and a 5-year-old daughter that deserve to inherit a healthy planet and a healthy democracy, and I do this work for those little guys. I think that for me, really, this issue is just foundational to all of the other challenges that we face as a nation, and we can't really make progress on so many things that are near and dear to me, whether it's income inequality or climate change or guns or the opioid crisis or the huge national debt burden that my children will be inheriting. All of those things and more is really, why I'm so, passionate about doing this work. It seems to me the cause of our time, and now is the time to step up. So that's, I guess that's my short story.
Yeah, you said that there's not one thing that often is, the one reason people are interested in this. It affects so many other things. And Lori, if it's all right, I'm going to take you off mute, and if you could just let the couple folks on the call know where in Colorado you're calling in from, and real quickly, why you care about getting money out of politics.
Yes, I'm calling in from Wheat Ridge, Colorado, and I actually spent time training in Boston, but grew up in Colorado and always wanted to come back here. So, second time back, I've been a resident for, and what Ben, I have seen what the lobbies can and trying to make some changes, and what a heavy lift that has been. And then I am very involved with trying to promote youth wellness and safety, and so now we're seeing the ravages of the jewel industry following the playbook of the tobacco industry and the epidemic we've got here. Bush is having the highest number of youth vaping in the nation, most of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You know, Lori, Jeff Clements started American Promise in 2016 after spending a number of years as the Assistant Attorney General in Massachusetts, litigating against global tobacco corporations, which were using the argument that they had First Amendment rights. So the tobacco industry certainly is a big benefactor of these series of Supreme Court rulings. Let's go to Marty Amble. Marty, I'm going to unmute you here. And where in Colorado are you calling in from, and why do you care about getting money out of politics?
I am calling from Denver.
Great.
And I have been participating actually with Move to Amend for about the past 5 years. Super. And kind of along the same 28th Amendment path. Corporations are money, corporations are not people, money is not speech, and I'm kind of looking to see what the notable differences are between what we've been doing with Move to Amend and what American Promise is doing.
Great. Well, thank you for being here, Marty, a seasoned veteran. Looking forward to your insight and hopefully answering all your questions. Let's go over to Walt Giesel. Walt, you're unmuted. Where are you calling from, and why do you care about getting money out of politics?
Oh, I'm a friend of Marty's, and Denver.
Great.
And let me. Am I cut off?
All right. You know, you cut out for a second or two there, but I can hear you just fine right now.
Okay. Mostly the second half of every issue is corporations acting badly. And, you know, we need to turn this around. So I wanted to see what, kind of like Marty, what input you could add beyond what Move to Amend has been doing.
Definitely,
and,
definitely.
Yeah. Who's next?
All right. All right. You know, always good to be doing this with people you know. So glad that it's not all strangers on this call. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Walt. Thank you, Lori, for being here. Let's go to Robin Martin. Robin, you're unmuted. Where are you calling in from, and why do you care about getting money out of politics?
I'm calling from Littleton, Colorado as well, and I don't think the voice of the normal American can be heard because basically we can't afford all the lobbyists and the political interests that seem to sway our legislative leaders. And I'd like to know who the champions are currently of the 28th Amendment. I'm relatively new with this process, and I'd like to be able to reference them as I communicate with other members in the state.
Fantastic. Thank you, Robin, for being here, and we can definitely go over who are sort of the leaders in Congress for this amendment. And last but certainly not least, let's go to Lavon. Lavon, you're unmuted. Where are you calling in from, and why do you care about getting money out of politics?
Hi, I'm calling from Lakewood, and I believe that regardless of, you know, what your issue is, if it's social justice or climate change, the environment, you know, all of the things that we are trying to move forward and be progressive about, they're all impacted negatively by the massive amounts of money that we have flowing into our political system. And like Walt and Marty, I also volunteer with Move to Amend, and for the very same reason that I do believe we need an amendment to get this done, because as long as we have the Supreme Court interpreting the Constitution the way that they are now, we're stuck. So that's my 2 cents.
Fantastic. Yeah, you said it. Something has to be done, and I'll go last. This is Azer Cole. I'm also calling in from Boston, Massachusetts. I thought I wanted to be an environmental journalist for a while. And then, like all of you guys, realized that the issue I cared about, money in politics, was driving the inequalities I thought I saw in the world. And I got really interested in the campaign finance landscape and to this work. And it's just always a pleasure to meet like-minded people who, from all various walks of life and for different reasons have come to this same place. So thanks everyone for being here. And Ben, I'm hoping you can give us sort of the 20,000 foot view of, and it might be various amounts of review for different people, but the 20,000 foot view of why we're advocating for this amendment, and just quickly explain, sort of what's been done already and what opportunities lie ahead.
Sure. Yeah, happy to do that. It sounds like most of the folks on the call have a pretty good idea of how we got into this mess in the first place through organizing with Move to Amend, which is a great organization. We've been working on this ever since the 2010 Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, and actually before. Not sure we need to get into too many details about the series of court decisions like Buckley v. Vallejo and Citizens United and McCutcheon and others that have got us into this mess. But what I think is really important, to understand and to come to terms with is that we need this amendment more now than ever. $45 billion has been spent in our elections since that disastrous decision in Citizens United. Corporations gaining more power and more influence over elected officials and domestic and foreign policy, and it's certainly things are not getting better. They're kind of going in the other way, as we well know. And I think that we have made great strides in this movement for a 28th Amendment over the past, I guess 9 years. We just passed the 9th anniversary of the Citizens United decision and have made great strides in this movement. As I'm sure most on the call know, 19 states have officially gone on record calling for this reform, over 800 cities and towns, millions of Americans across party lines. What has been missing is a real cross-partisan approach to translate some of those victories into votes in Congress, right? It's great to have these 19 states officially on record calling for this reform, but as you folks know, in Colorado, when you passed the ballot initiative in 2012, at 73%, I believe the vote came in at, there's still, a half a dozen members of Congress in Colorado that aren't on board yet for the 28th Amendment. And we see that all over the place. We see that in Washington State that passed a ballot initiative. We see it in California and we see it in Montana and all of these other, states that have officially gone on record to call for this reform, yet we have a number of members of Congress that are still not, I hate to use the word compliant, but compliant with the will of the people. As we know, this is an 80+% issue. What American Promise is really focused on is organizing at the grassroots level, city by city, town by town, community by community, and state by state, to help translate some of those victories into votes and also to create some space for some new victories. American Promise has gone to great lengths to make sure that we are driving that cross-partisan message without all folks on board, regardless of your political stripe. A 28th Amendment will not be possible. This is to get 67 votes in the Senate, 290 in the House, and 38 states to ratify such an amendment. We need to make sure that we are being disciplined about in our approach and our ability to bring folks in from all sides of the aisle. And that's what I'm really excited about. I think that as we've seen in the 116th Congress, this brand new Congress, it's the first time that the amendment has been introduced in a bipartisan fashion with leaders. A Republican leader and a Democratic leader. The Republican John Katko from New York's 24th district, and Ted Deutsch from Florida, who's been on this for quite some time. But this is the first time we've seen this breakthrough in having a bipartisan introduction with leadership, taking a stand and going out on a limb and proposing this really bold, bipartisan approach, which has never never happened before, and on all of the previous Congresses that have had amendment proposals introduced, it's never had a Republican and a Democrat right at the top. So I think that we're making really great strides. American Promise is to kind of developed and fostered really great relationships with John Katko's office in New York, and really grateful for his leadership on this. Now, our plan is certainly to expand that support as much as we can. As we know, with H.R. 1, H.R. 1 is a broad reform package that I'm sure most folks on the call have heard about, that the Democrats have said is their number one priority in the new Congress. This is ethics reform and voting rights, protections, and gerrymandering and public financing of elections, and all these different policy packages, which is really great. But the problem is it is extremely partisan, and unfortunately, we risk having this issue be pegged as a Democrat or progressive thing when it's not. It's an American thing. It's not it's not a Republican thing. It's not a Democrat thing. It's purely an American issue of how we want to live in a representative democracy. And our goal right now is to really create a bipartisan, cross-partisan, however you want to call it, lifeboat before, with more Republicans in Congress joining on before, the H.R. 1 train leaves the station, and we have a much harder time bringing Republicans on board. Now, I don't think that we'll get to 290, in this Congress, but certainly in the next, and we need to start laying the groundwork now. I'll go into why we think Colorado is so important, but and happy to answer any other questions. But Azer, I'll kick it back over to you, and then I can talk a little about Colorado or open it up to Q&A.
Yeah, fantastic. And I should have mentioned this, you guys, throughout. Just press 1 on your keypad to raise your hand, and that will let me know to call on you. But, to Ben's point of this being a cross-partisan issue, one of the things American Promise has worked hard to do is to compile a cross-partisan advisory council with people like Nina Turner. She's president of Our Revolution, Bernie Sanders' political arm, and she's about as progressive as they come, and she's right up there alongside people like Al Simpson, a retired senator from Wyoming, conservative, and they probably couldn't agree on much of anything at all, maybe not even what to get for lunch together, but they can agree on this one issue, that there's too much money in politics and we need a constitutional amendment to fix things. And that type of cross-partisan visibility is really helpful for volunteers working in American Promise groups all across the country to be going in to their Republican offices and start to develop these relationships, making them understand, too, that this isn't an issue that one party cares about. This is an issue that folks from all political stripes care about. And I see that LaVon has her hand up. So, LaVon, I'm just going to unmute you. And thanks for your question or your comment.
Oh, thanks so much. Did I understand, Ben, to say that there is a bill that has been introduced in this new session? I think it's the 116th Congress?
Yeah, you're right. It is the 116th Congress. And there has been a number of amendment proposals that have already been introduced in the 116th Congress. There is the last Congress, the 115th Congress, I believe there was 13 or 14 different proposals introduced by different members of Congress. Right now, there have been 3 that have been introduced. The one that I was specifically referring to before is HJR2, and there's a really great website called unitedforthepeople.org. It's the number 4, not spelled out 4, so United the number 4 thepeople.org, and if you go online, you can see all of the amendment proposals that have been introduced over the past several years. Different states that are on board, the localities that have passed resolutions, all of that. It's a really great resource run by our friends at People for the American Way. So there has been a number of proposals that have been introduced in this Congress. The one that I was referring to before, HJR2, is the one that has the bipartisan co-sponsorship right at the top.
Oh, perfect. I'll look at that one. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. And again, if you have questions or comments, go ahead and press 1. But Ben, it doesn't look like anyone has their hand up yet. You want to give some specifics into, the strategic importance and potential huge breakthrough present in Colorado?
Yeah, sure. So, as I mentioned before, and I'm not sure if folks on the phone had participated in this effort. It was a great effort put forth by Move to Amend and Common Cause and Free Speech for People and others to put this issue directly to the voters, to get a mandate from the voters that they want their members of Congress, to do everything within the power of their offices to advance this historic work. That was an initiative put to the voters in 2012. It passed, I believe, like I said, 73%. An overwhelming cross-partisan majority turned out to vote in favor of this, yet we still have folks like Ken Buck and Cory Gardner and Scott Tipton and others, that haven't signed on to any amendment proposals, nor have led on that they intend to. And so we believe, this is a really critical turning point for the amendment work in this Congress to start laying some groundwork to bring some more Republicans on board. I'll be in D.C. next week meeting with Lisa Murkowski's Chief of Staff, Susan Collins' Chief of Staff, and Cory Gardner's Chief of Staff. Cory Gardner, as you folks probably well know, is going to face a pretty tough re-election campaign in 2020. We think that there's probably, a chance to start a really positive and civil conversation with his office that voters in Colorado, expect him to comply with the will of the people and sign on board to this amendment. Our approach at American Promise is a little bit different than some. We very much take the approach of developing and strengthening relationships. It's all relationship based, and kind of waving your finger and yelling and screaming and bird dogging at events there's a place for that, certainly, and I think that in some cases that works, but for this kind of long-term approach like what the amendment is, we really need to build trust with some of our legislators, and we think that there's a possibility to do that with Cory Gardner. I've had great relationships starting with Ken Buck's office as well. He's he wrote a book called, I think it's called The Swamp, which he's really blasting how things work in Congress. Hasn't officially said anything about the amendment, but you can't have an honest and frank conversation about draining the swamp without really talking about how much money's just destroying our political system and our democracy. And so doubling down on that ballot initiative in 2012, I think is really important. Developing relationships with folks like Cory Gardner and Ken Buck and Scott Tipton and certainly their district staff, I think is really, really important. And having civil dialogue with folks and figuring out what their concerns are, what's holding them back, what can we do to bring them on board is I think is just really going to be constructive. And I think that by the end of this year, I think that we'll be able to get one or some of the folks in Colorado that haven't previously signed on to sign on, which I'm very excited about, and would be I mean, honestly, a huge breakthrough for this movement nationally. Just before this year, the only Republican in Congress that had signed on was Walter Jones from North Carolina, and happy to have Mr. Jones's support. But again, you know, we need 290 votes in the House and 67 in the Senate. We need a lot more than just Mr. Jones, and so happy to see John Katko join on board. Their office has been helping us connect with other members of their caucus to discuss this. We'll likely do a briefing with other staff members from Republican offices next week as well. But Colorado really, because of that direct mandate from the people, and I think because of the energy that's there, I think that if we were able to get one or two more votes, or commitments from folks that are from that state, it really would, will be a huge breakthrough for the movement, and I'm really looking forward to it. Eventually we will reach a tipping point with this movement, with all of the organizations, coming together to work with us, whether it's Public Citizen, Move to American Promise, or whatever. All of us working together and working towards these breakthroughs, we'll reach a tipping point to where folks just don't have any other option. They'll have to sign on board. And so Colorado,
we've got some hands that are jumping up here.
Yeah, sure.
Great. Well, we've got some time for Q&A, and then we can follow up with some specific ways to get involved and have an impact here. But Walt, your hand went up first, so you're unmuted here, Walt.
Okay, two questions really. First, we've been trying to get Diana to do something Diana to get. And as much as she's worked on all of the Virginia guys' campaign, something like Clean Campaigns, we haven't gotten past vague mention of free speech issues. But the other question is, how are you framing the conservative approach?
Sure. I'm happy to jump in there, Azer, if you want. How are we framing the conservative approach? Well, I mean, we have, within our network, a number of conservatives that are fighting right alongside us. Folks like John Putner from Take Back Our Republic and others. I just delivered testimony in New Hampshire last week that would make New Hampshire the 20th state calling for this reform, and testified next to a guy named Jim Rubens, who's a Republican state senator who really looks at this in a number of ways. One, states' rights, that the federal government basically saying that states don't have the constitutional authority to regulate their own elections, which really drives conservatives wild. An economic perspective, that the fact that corporations with this kind of outsized influence drives down the competitive nature of our capitalist market system, and therefore has a huge impact on the health of our overall economic system and capitalism. The fact that we have foreign influence in our elections, because many of the corporations that dump money into our elections from their general treasuries have foreign shareholders and board members. Just a few examples of how some of our friends that approach this right of center are delivering this message, talking with their members of Congress, talking with their state legislators, and talking to their friends and neighbors about this from the conservative perspective, and also from individual liberty and free speech. There's a great op-ed in the Daily Caller by John Putner. If you Google that, you could probably find it. That really talks about our liberties as Americans are being trampled on by folks with extraordinary wealth that can afford to write huge campaign checks when other folks can't. And so there's a whole range of angles that folks on the conservative side come to this work through, and our job is to make sure that they have a place to go to to do this work in their communities and to be the citizen leaders that they are, to organize and to build champions in the media, write letters to the editor, build those relationships with members of Congress, etc. I hope that answered your question.
Great, and we've got a couple more hands up. So Robin, your hand was up next. You're unmuted here.
Thank you very much. I actually did bring up the unitedforthepeople.org site, and I noticed that in Colorado, being one of the 19 states, that we had only 5 local actions, and they were all in 2012. So, wow. So no initiative since then. What do you suggest to do something in a positive way to at least get it happening? And it was only 5, Telluride, Fort Collins, Jamestown, Boulder, and Pueblo. And since some of us are from Littleton, why can't we jump in with Arapahoe or Jeffco? What does it take to actually get some action started in our counties?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm gonna Robin, and I'm so glad that you brought that up, and I'll come right back to that. Let's see if there's anyone else has a question, because I want to talk about how we get into action. But I'm really glad that you brought that up. And 2012 was 7 years ago at this point in time, and some of those resolutions are getting a little sleepy. So time to breathe some new life into it for sure. So I'll come right back to how we kind of get moving.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Great, and LaVon has her hand back up. So LaVon, you're unmuted here.
Oh, perfect. So just going back to the meetings that you'll be having here in Colorado, and more just for partnership information than anything. In Colorado, Ed Perlmutter and Jared Polis, who, of course, now is our governor, had both signed the We the People Amendment, the HJR 48, in the last Congress. And I think it would be fair to say that we're hopeful, that with Jason Crow replacing Mike Kaufman, we'll have hopefully more support there. I know that Jason Crow actually ran on, we need to have campaign finance reform. But then the other thing that I just wanted to mention, if it would be helpful, I did meet with, through another group, Colorado Votes, on January 10th, I met with Steve Emmon at Cory Gardner's office and Quan Atlas at Bennett's office, and spoke with both of them about, in general, money in politics, and specifically the HJR resolution or amendment. So if it would be helpful, I'd be happy to just send you my follow-up emails that I had sent to both of them so you have contact information.
That'd be great. Yeah, that'd be great. I'd really appreciate that. How did that meeting go?
In the case of Cory Gardner, Stephen basically said he doesn't have any idea how the senator would or what opinion the senator would have about that. And that's not really surprising. Unfortunately, Gardner is pretty famous for not having an opinion until he is forced to have an opinion and make a vote or whatever. So I did follow up to say, I'd kind of like to understand his position, and I haven't heard anything back. I need to follow up again with him. And then in the case of Bennett's office, Quan Atlas, they were, of course, much more receptive and told me, which I was kind of excited, they told me that he was in favor of the We the People amendment. But I haven't gotten any more information out of Quan about that either. So anyway. Got it.
Oh, that's great. Sounds like you've done some awesome work and some grassroots lobbying. It's what we got to do a little bit more of, which is really wonderful. Glad to hear you have that experience, and And certainly, if you wouldn't mind sending the follow-up email, that would be really helpful. Again, I'm going to be meeting with Cory Gardner's chief of staff in D.C. next week, and any background info I can get is always super helpful.
Yeah. I mean, it would just, maybe it helps move the conversation forward that there really are people, constituents in Colorado asking for this and, meeting with the staff.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that gets me back to Robin's question is kind of how do we get into action? And I think that really what's most important is, folks need to hear from constituents, without pressure from their districts or from constituents, there's not really a lot of incentive to act. Doing the right thing alone isn't always the prime motivator for a lot of folks. And I think that hearing from constituents directly is always what helps move the needle. It was instrumental in getting John Katko on board, again, the first Republican to take a leadership stance on this from New York, and I think that's really critical. So American Promise, our model is launching grassroots chapters similar to Move to Amend, kind of all over the country, but with a very specific focus on building champions in the media and moving elected officials up the champion scale from opposed to almost there to passive supporter to champion, et cetera. And so kind of it's certainly an involved process to get a new chapter going. That's kind of the long-term goal that we'll launch a few new chapters in Colorado in 2019. But in the short term, I'll be in Colorado a week from Saturday, speaking at the Common Cause Policy Summit, and then doing an event in Longmont and an event in Greeley, kind of a public event to build awareness. It's an educational event. This is both events are strategically in Ken Buck's, the 4th Congressional District, and to start to get folks interested in building those relationships with the district office of Ken Buck. And what we'd love to see, soon, is a little bit more, as starting a chapter in American Promise Association, as we call them, is kind of more of a long-term thing throughout 2019, and hopefully launch a few of those in early summer. Between now and then, because of the status of HR1 and its kind of amendment counterpart HJR2 really taking form and really moving in Congress quickly, we need folks to organize and reach out to their elected officials, Cory Gardner specifically, Ken Buck and Scott Tipton, right away and start to hear from constituents. So what we're looking for is, in the absence of actually organizing these chapters, as we hope to do over the next several months, but between now and the next couple months really is, delivering petitions, delivering the ballot initiative that was passed in 2012. We will be doubling down on that 2012 ballot initiative with a new resolution in the Colorado legislature that also includes extreme partisan gerrymandering as a component to this constitutional amendment that refers back to it also refers back to the 2012 ballot initiative. So to help advocate for that with their state elected officials, that's going to be coming very soon and most likely introduced in the next in the next 30 days or so. So there's a whole host of things that we can do: writing letters to the editor, delivering petitions, building those relationships with members of Congress, advocating for this at the Colorado State House in Denver for the new resolution that we hope to introduce in the next 30 days, and just hoping that folks on the phone might be interested in one, perhaps spreading the word to folks if you know anybody in Longmont or Boulder or Greeley or or anyone there to join the event, or if you guys want to join the events as well, I'm sure Azer can send a follow-up email about those. That's going to be, they're both going to be Sunday, February 10th. And then number two, if you are interested in kind of this, immediate, rapid action in terms of getting letters written and delivering petitions to members of Congress, that sort of thing, Azer would love to hear from you if you could follow up with him, and then we can organize a plan to really get things moving quickly, because I think that we really do run the risk of having this thing just be pegged as a Democratic thing, which is not. And I think someone before mentioned the HJ Res 48. It's a great proposal that was put forth by Rick Nolan and has been for a number of years. It's really hard for Republicans to sign on to a bill that is just loaded up with Democrats. And so, whether we are working on a potential new cross-partisan amendment that will be introduced that's similar to HJ Res 31, but also and HJR2, but explicitly includes unions and some other things that conservatives wanted and Republicans wanted to see in there. So that's kind of long term, but in the immediate term, there's a lot of really great action that we're hoping folks can take to help move the needle on this, because I think time is of the essence to make sure that we get this kind of cross-partisan beachhead before it just gets overrun with Democrats. So hoping that folks are willing to get involved, and if that's the case, shoot Azer an email, azorc@americanpromise.net, and we'll devise a plan.
Yeah, and I'm going to send a follow-up email to you all tomorrow with all of this info Ben just alluded to. My email will also be right there, so if you have any questions for me or for Ben, that'll be an easy way to get in contact, and it'll have the event details that Ben mentioned and the specific other ways, whether it's letters to the editor, petition deliveries, everything you need to know will be in the follow-up email. And I see that Marty has had his hand up for a couple minutes here, so Marty, you're unmuted here.
Okay, now just a question. Well, two things. One, the HJR 48, the We the People Amendment, is kind of looking to get in line to be introduced in numerical order so that it keeps the same number that it's had in the past. So that's going to be coming before too long. And the other thing is, Jeff pretty much wrote the book on corporations are not people, but that is pretty much left out of the American Promise version. Is that too much of a heavy lift, or is that going to keep its way back in, or what's the forecast for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So American Promise doesn't have a version of an amendment. We are supporting all amendment proposals, including HJ Res 48 and HJ Res 2, which is now introduced as the Democracy for All Amendment. American Promise has spearheaded an effort called Writing the 28th Amendment to get consensus on what the language should say, whether that is one amendment is specifically addressing money politics and distinguishing between natural persons and corporations, or two amendments that has that, and then another one for corporate rights, et cetera, or all one together, right? So American Promise does not have our own specific amendment that we're addressing. We're supporting all of these amendment proposals the best that we can. Again, the one that we're kind of shopping around at the time is most similar to in the last Congress, which was HJ Res 31, which distinguishes between natural persons and corporations, and then deals with the money and politics issue, but not as strong on the corporate rights piece. We got to see what Republicans in Congress are signing on to. Is it one amendment? Is it two amendments? We need more feedback. We need more consensus among organizations, among citizens all across the country. the Writing the 28th Amendment project has been doing these public town halls all over the country, in St. Louis in Maine, and Boston, and Columbus, Ohio, and Los Angeles. We have a couple coming up in Dallas and Oklahoma City. This is bringing folks together, constitutional scholars, citizens, all across the board to talk about what is the specific language that should be included in the 28th Amendment. I know this is kind of a long-winded answer to your question here, but again, we're supporting all of the amendment proposals, including HJ Res 48. Problem is, it's extremely hard to get Republicans to sign on to bills, especially in how divided and how partisan our Congress is now. To get Republicans to sign on to bills that have 40, 50 Democratic co-sponsors, or in the case of HJ Res 31, in the last Congress that had 140 Democratic co-sponsors. I mean, there's just no way that Republicans are going to touch that. So we need a proposal that can get through with Democrats and Republicans alike. So, and that's really our goal for 2019, and to get as many Republicans on board as we can. Our goal is to have this voted out of Congress and sent back to the states at the latest by 2022, and we don't get there unless we make some serious progress this year and next in bringing some Republicans on board.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just add to that, Marty, my job has been primarily to support the local American Promise chapters all across the country. And similar to the fact that American Promise doesn't have one particular amendment we're rallying around, we don't have one particular amendment that we're saying, grassroots group, you have to support this amendment. Groups are coming to their own decisions about how they're engaging around the 28th Amendment, and it's American Promise's job to support folks how they want to be supported. So that's the tone in their relationship with local chapters in the national office, which is a really collaborative sort of back and forth listening and learning tone. So just wanted to add that there. And again, if anyone has any questions or comments, go ahead and press 1. It doesn't look like anyone has any right now. And Levon, I see you're using the chat feature here on Maestro. And yes, I'll send the details for the events in both Longmont and Greeley tomorrow. Tomorrow, probably mid-morning, I'd imagine, in that recap email with sort of specific action steps on how to get involved. Ben, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, but no one has their hands up here.
No, just real quickly, I'll just close by saying, appreciate you guys joining the call tonight, and looking forward to seeing you if you can make it out to the events next Sunday. And just to say that, again, the American Promise program and within the chapters is very specific, but tailored to each individual group that are working on different things. What folks are doing in Ohio could be different than what folks are doing in Virginia or Colorado, et cetera. But the need for this kind of short-term action, I think, is just really critical. So we can start to get folks like Cory Gardner and Ken Buck and others on board. So very much looking forward to working with everyone. Please spread the word to your networks and follow up with any questions, and just really appreciate all of your experience and dedication and commitment to be working on this issue for so many years and continuing that fight. So thank you to all, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
And Ben, I know that while you were talking there, Walt's hand popped up, so I just want to call on Walt before we sign off here. You're unmuted here, Walt.
Oh, I was wondering if basically the only problem I have with HJR 48 is the legalese, and most of the early amendments, most of the amendments that passed are quite simple in their language. Could you basically do a rewrite and bring some of your conservative people in? Is that at all a plausible plan?
Yeah, I think that's part of the plan. Well, it's a good question. I mean, I think it's part of the plan to make sure that we have a consensus amendment that'll actually get conservatives to sign on to. You know, we can be introducing the same amendment over and over again for the next 40 years, but unless we get Republicans to join onto it, it's not going to go anywhere. You know, so that is the plan to build, you know, this kind of consensus cross-partisan language and push it forward. And again, whether that's one amendment or 3 amendments or whatever it might be, that's the plan. And you know, as we know from American history, amendments come in waves. Very rarely are they passed just one at a time. You know, there are lots of conversations about amendments for congressional term limits and like I said, gerrymandering, you know, making gerrymandering unconstitutional, and money in politics and corporate rights. And I think just, you know, figuring out, you know, what the best approach is what the writing the 28th Amendment is all about. It's what, you know, these grassroots meetings with Cory Gardner's office and others is all about, and having that open and honest dialogue with folks so we can really, you know, push this thing forward.
All right, let's end on that note. I'm going to take everyone off mute here, and everyone have a great rest of your night.